Good evening and welcome back to our continuing series on the central prayer of Judaism, the Shemona Esrei, translated simply as the 18 benedictions. Actually, there were 19. The 19th was added on later. The prayer that is also referred to as the Amidah, the standing prayer, forms the basis of Judaism's concept of prayer. And it's divided, as we discussed every one of these weeks that we've been covering this prayer, into three parts. The first part are three blessings in which we praise God. 12 blessings that follow are the requests that we make of God, 6 personal requests, 6 communal requests, and the 13th, actually, that is an overall general request. And that's followed by 3 blessings of expressions of gratitude. And now we're up to the second of those 3. And this is called the blessing Modim. It begins with the words Modim, Anachnu Lach. We give thanks to you. We'll soon see there are other translations as well. And this is one of 3 blessings in which we express gratitude. But of all the 3 that express gratitude, this is the one that expresses it explicitly, directly, not implicitly as the other 2. And we'll discuss a little bit of the other 2, why they are referred to as thanksgiving, although they don't even use the term thanks. They seem to be requests and praises as well. But first, let's focus on this blessing. This blessing is referred to as by the word hoda'ah, which simply means gratitude, or it can be translated as acknowledgement, or even as submission. The meaning behind those will come clear as we go on. Where did this blessing start? When did it begin? As we did with the other blessings, that at certain points in Jewish history, when something happened, the Jews were in distress, or whatever else that necessitated some divine assistance, the angels came forward and they expressed their praise of God with respect to one aspect of God's behavior towards us. What is this prayer? Where did this prayer come in? When King Solomon, who built the temple, and he tried to take the ark and bring it into the temple and put it in the chamber where it belonged, the Holy of Holies. The Talmud tells us that King Solomon confronted a major dilemma because the gates would not open. And he prayed repeatedly, and only when he mentioned the merit of his father David did the gates open. And that was the most thrilling moment for King Solomon, because it was understood that the reason why the gates would not open for the ark, or that there was some question as to whether God was happy with the temple, was due to King David's quote-unquote indiscretion with Bathsheba, which, by the way, according to the Talmud, was not really adultery, and it was not really a major sin, but it had the appearance of such, and King David treated it as if he had sinned egregiously. And that the problem with the temple, why it was not built until the days of King Solomon, and why there were some problems, it seemed, was due to King David's indiscretion. And when the gates opened, only because of King David and his merit, when he was mentioned, that proved that whatever there was in King David's record concerning Bathsheba was expunged, and it was completely erased. And now the temple was now ready to receive the ark, which was the most important part of the temple. And at that point, the angels exclaimed that God should be praised, and he is the one that we must give thanks to. And that's where this blessing came from. It was the words of the angels expressing gratitude for the ark being allowed to become part of the temple. This blessing, which is number 18 of the overall 19, follows the blessing in which we ask God to restore the service in the temple. And the Talmud, Tractate Megillah, which gives a running commentary to the Shemona Esrei, very brief, a few words for each one of the blessings, says that after we have service, that we give gratitude. And it quotes a verse in the book of Psalms, in Psalm 50, where it talks about offering a sacrifice and giving praise. So we see there's a connection between sacrifices or service in the temple and gratitude. What exactly is the connection? Why is gratitude closer to service than it is, let's say, for healing? God heals us, we should be grateful. God provides us with our sustenance, we should be grateful. God does all the great things that we refer to in the Shemona Esrei, but it's only after we talk about service and the sacrifices that we give gratitude to God. And the answer is very simple. The greatest reason for giving gratitude to God is not for the things that we get, but for the opportunity that God gives us to be able to serve Him. There is no greater gift, there is no greater blessing for which we must be so grateful than it is for the opportunity to have a relationship with God. Because we have to understand that God is infinite. He's beyond infinite. We are finite. We are totally insignificant creatures that have absolutely no bearing on God, have no relationship, real true relationship, left to our own devices. We are as insignificant as a grain of dust. And actually, there's no difference between us and the grain of dust in relation to God. And that God not only created us, gave us life, but He also gave us an opportunity to serve Him, that we have a relationship with Him. There could be no greater reason for us to express our gratitude. This connection between gratitude and sacrifices is also found in a statement that our sages in the Midrash tell us that in the Messianic age, the temple will be rebuilt, we will have sacrifices again. However, the only private sacrifice that an individual would offer, not part of the communal service, that will still be intact, that will still be needed, will be the thanksgiving offering. We won't have to bring sin offerings, we won't have to bring guilt offerings. We will, however, still bring a thanksgiving offering. And that thanksgiving offering symbolizes the idea that thanksgiving and offerings go together. And the only offering, the true service, is one of thanksgiving. Well, this really leads us to a little bit of a deeper understanding between the connection of service and thanksgiving. Because what is the ultimate expression of thanksgiving? It's when we are able to submit and surrender our own egos, our own existence to that which is higher. And that's the essence of what a thanksgiving offering is. There's a work called Seder Hayom. That's a work about 350 years ago. It was written by a disciple of the great Kabbalist, the Ari, where he goes through all of the prayers. And he says that this prayer of Modim is a Golus prayer, Galut, an exile prayer, a diaspora prayer, which means that the prayer that precedes it, the one in which we ask God for the restoration of the service in the temple, that's a blessing that relates to the time of redemption. The time of redemption, we have the services in the temple. But this prayer, where we say Modim, where the focus is on faith, not on really witnessing and experiencing the closeness that we have with God, but there's a certain concealment of that closeness, so we can't really understand godliness. We have to rely on Modim. We acknowledge, we accept it, even though we don't understand it. This is a prayer that focuses on the needs that we have in the time of exile. And as the Seder Hayom puts it, that this prayer is especially poignant in the time of exile, when we are so persecuted and oppressed, when our lives are so precarious. We are so grateful that God takes us out of all these terrible situations that occasion our existence in exile, that we are more appreciative now than we would have been, than we were in the days when we had our own country with all total independence and freedom, and Jews had nothing to worry about. Now we are even more grateful. So this is a specifically Golos-oriented prayer. This is also, as I mentioned, the 18th blessing, the 18th benediction. Everyone knows the significance of the number 18. 18 in Hebrew is Chai. Why is it Chai? Because, as we mentioned so many times, Hebrew does not have its own numbering system outside of the letters of the alphabet. If you want to say 1, you use the letter Aleph. 2 is the letter Beis, and so on and so forth. How would you write 18? You could write it two ways, a Yud and a Ches, or a Ches and a Yud. Ches is 8, Yud is 10. 10 and 8 is 18. So 18 is Chai. And that's not just some type of a cute little thing that is an excuse to wear a necklace with the letters Ches and Yud on it because it's a nice word, but 18 symbolizes the idea of life. And there is a very profound connection between gratitude and life. As we say at the end of this prayer, V'chol hachayim yudu chasela, all those who are alive, thank you forever. And that's based on a verse in Isaiah, chapter 38, verse 19. Chai, chai, yudu chasela. Those who are alive, and only those who are alive, will thank you, will show gratitude to you forever. That means in order to give gratitude, you have to be alive. But it's not just that dead people can't say thank you. That's obvious. But it also means that a person who is grateful, a person who is capable of acknowledging the other, is truly alive. And just to explain it briefly, and there are many different levels of this and many different deeper ways of looking at it, but just a little bit beneath the surface. When we talk about life of a stone, of a rock, we don't say that it's alive. It's called domim. It's silent. It's inanimate. It has no mobility. So it's as if it is dead. But it does really have a soul. The Arizal, the great Kabbalah, says that even a rock has a soul, but its soul is its very existence. The fact that it exists and it doesn't revert to non-existence means that it is being created continuously by God. That is its soul. But it's a soul that is inanimate. There's no mobility. So in terms of life, you really don't refer to it as a living being. But then we get to the next level, and that is vegetation. Tzomeach in Hebrew. What characterizes its life? The fact that it is able to grow. It grows. It reproduces. That's a sign of life. Now we get to the next level, the animal. The animal has a soul, a living soul, as it says in the Torah. But what is different about an animal as compared to a plant? Plants move, grow, reproduce, so do animals. But the animal has more mobility. The animal is not fixed to one place. The animal is able to express its needs and its desires, so it's able to express itself to the outside. So its life is characterized by its ability to be mobile beyond just growing and reproducing, but by also relating to the rest, to the outside world in a more pronounced way, in a more overt way. So it's a greater form of life. Now the question is, what makes human life, that God gave the human being a soul, what makes human life more alive than an animal? It seems to be the same. We grow, we move, we're mobile, we relate, we express ourselves to the outside, what our needs are. And the answer is, a human being is able to go outside of himself or herself. The human being is able to acknowledge the existence of another and even surrender some of his or her identity, needs, desires, rights, privileges to the other. We could sacrifice to the other. We can give of ourselves to the other. We could rise to something that is beyond us. The animal is just doing things. Yes, it's expressing itself to the outside, but it's all for its own benefit. So it goes back in circles. It's like water that is being filtered into a pool. It's the same water. It's not new water, or the air that's constantly being brought back into the room. Uh, it's the same sterile air. Human being is able to go out of himself or herself. And that's what gratitude is. Gratitude is a sign of human life, that you're able to go out of yourself and recognize that it's not just about me. It's not just I did everything. Someone else contributed to my well-being. Someone else contributed to my enhancement, to my existence, to my development, or whatever it is, on a small level or on a major level. So that's why gratitude in life. So it's not an accident that this prayer for gratitude is the 18th prayer. It's also said, I don't know if this is the common knowledge in the medical community, but that a person takes 18 breaths a minute. I'm sure it depends on the individual, but that seems to be the way it was. Maybe that was the average in a certain time. So chai, the breath of life, is related to the number 18. And we're thanking God for every breath that we take. That's part of what this prayer is about. It's also mentioned that this prayer has 86 words in it. And 86 is the gematria, the numerical value of the word Elohim, which is God. But it's not just God, it's God as he is cloaked in the mantle of nature, because the word Hateva, which means nature, the nature, is also 86. So what does that have to do with this prayer? Part of this prayer is to not only thank God for the miracles, which we do, but also to thank God for nature itself. Because one of the things about gratitude is not taking something for granted. Nobody will take for granted an act of generosity directed towards a person that is extraordinary. Someone gives you $1,000, you're going to say thank you. No matter how stingy or how not grateful a person is, you will probably just almost reflexively answer thank you. But if someone gives you a small amount of money, an insignificant amount, at least to the person who receives it, they may not think of saying thank you. And even if they say it, it'll be perfunctory. It won't really be filled with real meaning and emotion. So when we talk about thanking God, it's much easier for us to muster the courage. And it does take courage for some people to admit that someone else is responsible for your well-being, that you didn't do it all yourself. So it's easier to muster that courage for a miracle, when God does something extraordinary, when you're saved supernaturally from a disaster, when a windfall comes your way, then you're always grateful. But when the things that are natural, that we see every day, the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, we breathe, we have food on our table, and all the things that we see that happen, we drive and come back safely from whatever trip we take. These are things that we don't realize are really miracles. They're part of a natural pattern. This is where this blessing of gratitude is really more relevant, and it really is the test as to whether we are grateful people or we are selfish, self-centered individuals. Another thing about this prayer, that it contains 12 expressions of gratitude. There are different versions of this prayer and different ways that these expressions are mentioned here, but the reason why there are 12, we're told, is that on Shabbos, we do not recite the 12 prayers that are in between the three praises and the three expressions of gratitude. Remember, we said there are really 13, but on Shabbos we do say one blessing, but we're missing 12. So how do we allude at least to those 12 by having 12 expressions of gratitude in this prayer of Modim? That is a hint, an allusion to the 12 blessings. So even on Shabbos, we say Shemona Esrei, we say 18 blessings, actually, because we allude to those 12. Okay, now let's get to the prayer itself. We start off with 3 words, Modim Anachnu Lach. This is one translation, and I'll share with you a few other translations. Modim Anachnu Lach. We are thankful to you. Then there's another translation. We thankfully express acknowledgement to you. Or we thank forcefully acknowledge you. What is the reason why they add the word, at least the translators do, the word acknowledgement here? What's wrong with just thanking? Because thanking is not really worthy of its name unless there's an acknowledgement, a true acknowledgement that there is somebody or something else out there that you are beholden to. You can't take credit for it yourself. You have to acknowledge the other. So you could thank someone as a social gesture, social convention, but not really acknowledge the other profoundly. This is an expression of profound acknowledgement of the other. But in truth, that's what thanking really is. Thanking is really acknowledging the other. The translator just added the word to show what the point of this thankfulness is, that it's showing that you acknowledge the contribution of the other, and here the other is with a capital O, referring to God. But there's also another deeper meaning of the word modim. Modim also means to admit, to concede. That is, when two people have an argument, and each one stakes out a strong position, argues consistently against the position of the other, and then after the other really marshals a lot of support for his position, you realize that you are wrong and he is right. Many people will not admit that they were wrong because the ego in them does not allow them to admit that their argument all along was specious and was false, and that the other person was really right, especially if you were arguing very forcefully and dramatically. And this is especially true if a person staked out a position and a belief system that you kept for years and decades, and your whole life revolved around it. Let's take, for example, a person who teaches a certain theory in science or certain concept in philosophy, and after several decades it's proven wrong. A person who is less than honest, but it's not really a matter of honesty, it's a matter of ego. A person who's able to give up on their ego will come out openly and say, you know what I have advocated for decades was wrong. It takes a lot of courage to do that, to concede that you were wrong and the other person was right. I have a personal story that I'll share. It's a long story, I'll just mention the one salient feature of it. I once had a discussion with a professor who was an advocate of the secular theory of Bible criticism, that the Bible was not divine, it was not written by Moses, the 5 books of Moses I'm referring to, but it was written different times by different authors, and some brilliant editor put it together, which is ridiculous because the editor had absolutely no skill whatsoever by putting together so many different disjointed parts of the Torah, not written in chronological order, and so on and so forth. So much for his brilliance, but that's besides the point. That is the theory, and I posed a challenge to this person. Actually, someone else posed the challenge, and the person said, absolutely, that challenge is ridiculous, it has no merit. And I followed up after that. I said, well, you should know that there are very prominent scientists who are engaged in this area of research, and I'm referring specifically to hidden codes in the Torah that computers are being able to find, and I think you should have an open mind. And he admitted to me, even though a few minutes before he told someone that I know all about this and it's nonsense, he admitted to me he knows nothing about it. And I began to think to myself, why is he so resistant to this? The fact that his knee-jerk reaction was, without even knowing anything about it, and he admitted to me he just read a newspaper article about that subject, and yet he was able to tell a person, and this happened to be on national radio, by the way, on Larry King show, he was willing to say, I know everything about it, as if there's nothing more to know than what I read in that article, and it's nonsense. And yet he knew nothing about it, and he was so willing to dismiss it. And I realized that this man is a professor in the area of Bible criticism. His whole life he devoted wrote books to this subject. If this theory or belief, because it really is a belief, it's a faith like any other religion, that the Bible was written by the different writers, the different authors, the different documents, and if that's proven wrong now, let's say this man is 70 years old and he taught for 50 years or 40 years, that means his entire career has to be washed down the drain. He was really teaching falsehood. Now, it doesn't mean a physicist, one of his theories is proven wrong, he could still teach physics because he still has a lot to teach. But if someone's whole career was based on Bible criticism, the whole area, if it's proven wrong, it means you engaged in a field that was meaningless and false your whole life. I realize that to get a person to admit to that takes tremendous courage. And that's what modim means. Modim means we are willing to admit, we're willing to say to God, God, in spite of everything that we stand for, in spite of everything that we believed in the past, in spite of every part of our personality that is inconsistent and incompatible with God, I am prepared to say, God, I am wrong and you are right. No matter how the world outside seems to argue against the existence of God in our lives. You look at pain and suffering, you look at all the misery, you look at all the evil, and all the arguments. We're willing to say to God, Modim anachnu lach, we are able to admit, not just to acknowledge you, but to admit that we were wrong and you are right, even if it makes us look like we have been fools our whole life. We're willing to admit that. That takes a tremendous amount of faith and courage. And that's why this is a prayer specifically for the time of exile, because when the temple stood, you saw God's presence all over, you saw the miracles, you saw it was impossible for you to deny God's existence. You didn't have to admit, you didn't have to concede. You had to perhaps acknowledge it. But where we're talking about conceding, that's in a time of concealment. When you don't see God's presence, you say, God, I concede that you're right. But then there's a deeper level, one that is discussed in Hasidic literature, that there are really two perspectives at everything. There's our perspective and God's perspective. And we have to acknowledge that God created our perspective as well. So it has some merit, it has some validity. What is our perspective? Our perspective is we exist. That is the default position. We exist. What about God? We recognize that there must be a higher force that creates us. But it's unknowable, it's inscrutable. We don't understand it, we don't see it, we don't feel it. We believe or even know that it exists, but it's not our default perception. What we perceive is our selfhood. That is referred to in the terminology of Hasidic literature as lamata yesh or lamayla ayin. Below is yesh, is existence. What is above is ayin, is non-existence, unknowable existence, beyond existence. God has a different way of looking at it. In fact, it's the very reverse. God is the yesh. He is the true entity, the true existence. And we, in relation to God, is ayin. We are nothing. We have no real, true existence other than God's creative power. So what's our perception? Our perception is that we do exist as a true, independent existence, but yet we recognize God's source of our existence comes from God. But that's the unknowable. That's the secondary realization and perception. And here we say to God, Modim anachnu lach, we admit to you that your perception is right. Yes, this is who we are, this is how we perceive things, but we know that your perception is the right perception. And ultimately, in the Messianic age, we will all be able to see things through God's prism, and we will have his perception. But right now, as we are in exile, Modim anachnu lach, we have to concede that your perception is right. Avudraham, another medieval commentator on the Siddur, on the prayer book, says that the word modim itself numerically adds up to 100. And it's not a coincidence that Psalm 100 is about thanksgiving, about Mizmar L'Soda, a psalm of thanksgiving, the same root as the word modim. But the Avudraham points out something else about the significance of 100. He says that, referring to a story in the Talmud, King David saw a terrible thing happening. There was a plague that was killing 100 people a day. And it was uncanny that every day they counted 100 corpses. Until he discovered that the reason for that was, or the antidote to that was, for people to recite 100 blessings a day. That 100 times during the day we thank God. So when we say our prayers, we have Shemona Esrei, we have 18 or 19 blessings, and there are the morning blessings, the afternoon Amidah, the evening Amidah, and every time we eat, we make a blessing. The Birkat HaMazon, the blessing, grace after meals, has 4 blessings. So every time we use the facilities, we wash our hands and we say a blessing, thanking God for our healthy bodies. So if you really count the number of blessings a Jew is supposed to make in a given day, it's not that hard to reach 100, but you make an effort to make 100 blessings a day. And that stopped the plague. And there's something about 100, therefore, and modim, and expressing gratitude. What was it about the people that caused this plague? The commentaries explain because they lacked gratitude. They lacked the appreciation for God. They lacked the acknowledgement that God was responsible for their good fortune, for everything they had. And when King David realized that they were lacking in gratitude, he composed the prayer, Modim, the 100 blessings, and we, in turn, say Modim, which has the numerical value of 100, corresponding to those 100 blessings. It may also be suggested that the number 100, as even in English, we use the term 100% to denote that something is perfect. An imperfection, slight imperfection, would be 99%, and any other percentage. You can't go beyond 100. If you say 101%, you're not really adding. 100% means complete. Everything is there. And perhaps this blessing of Modim is one in which our gratitude to God is 100%. Whereas in the morning when we wake up and we say, Moda Ani, I am grateful to you, we're just half asleep. We just woke up. Our expression of gratitude is really, though it's profound and it comes from the core of your soul, it's not really fully integrated within your consciousness. It's not something that is expressed fully. It doesn't involve the totality of your being. When we say then in the beginning of our prayers, Hodul Hashem, thank God, Kiru Vishmo, call out in his name, but we're also saying we should be grateful to God and acknowledge gratefully God's existence. It's still the beginning of our prayers. We haven't yet allowed it to percolate within our system. When we get to Modim at the end of the Amidah, which is close to the end of all of our morning daily prayer, at this point, the Modim is 100%. It's complete, it's total. Still also interesting, and we have to make a note of this, that the word for gratitude, modim, modeh, hodu, toda, hoda'ah, all these different forms of the word are all related to the word Jew. Jew is Yehudi because Jews, most of them at the time of the Second Temple, came from the tribe of Judah. And Judah was so named by his mother, Leah, because when he was born, she expressed profound gratitude to God. And the word for gratitude that she used was Odeh, as Hashem. Now I will thank God. So she named him Yehuda. So the word Jew means someone who has the nature to be grateful to God. And that manifests itself by a Jew standing steadfast and not ever allowing himself to be pressured into accepting another God, another religion, another way of life, even if it means giving his or her life for that belief. And that's what we find in the book of Esther, which we just celebrated, the holiday of Purim. That's where the Torah, in the only place in the Torah where Jews are referred to, every Jew, not only those from the tribe of Yehuda, as Yehudim, as Jews. And that became the term that is most often used to describe us. Well, sometimes we're called Israelites, sometimes we're called Ivrim, Hebrews, but we're also mostly called Yehudim, Jews, because that is the nature of a Jew, that we acknowledge that there's one God, and we will never compromise that. We will never compromise our gratitude and acknowledgement that there is one God, and that is who we are, that is our essence. Now, when we say this prayer of Modim, we're supposed to bow, which is, of course, natural when you're expressing not just gratitude, but you're submitting yourself. As we said before, that Modim means I am surrendering myself, I am conceding, I am handing myself over to that higher authority. Then bowing is an expression, a manifestation of that surrender. You're not just saying it, you're actually acting it out. The Talmud says something very powerful, very strong, and very interesting, that a person who does not bow for Modim, that person's spine will become curved and crooked. And the reason for that is that in the Garden of Eden, you had the serpent. The serpent originally would stand upright, but after he enticed Eve to partake of the forbidden fruit, his punishment was that he would no longer stand upright, but he would be coiling as a snake does. He would not have that straight vertical spine. So what does all that have to do with not saying the prayer of Modim with bowing down? Because the whole idea of Modim is to be grateful to God, to not take anything for granted. The serpent symbolized the ultimate in ingratitude, and he also caused Eve to show that lack of gratitude. And Adam had a lack of gratitude. He blamed God for giving him his wife. That idea of not acknowledging God's role and not being satisfied with what God gives you, but you have this desire, God doesn't want me to eat that fruit, I don't have enough fruit, I have to have that fruit as well. All this was a sign of lack of gratitude. And since the snake's punishment was that he was no longer standing upright, the person who doesn't bow for Modim and shows a lack of gratitude is more or less like that serpent, more or less like that snake. Now, in this prayer, we say, Modim anachnu lach. Actually, the syntax in Hebrew is different from the way it is in English. Modim, gratitude. Anachnu, we, lach, to you. We express gratitude to you. What does you mean over here? You means God. But as we'll soon see, there are different manifestations of God. And the first thing we say to God is, we express our gratitude to you, to your essence. And then afterwards, we relate to God's manifestations. As we go into the next section, you are God, our God, and the God of our fathers forever. What are we expressing gratitude for? Number one, not just that God exists. That was the first thing. Modim anachnu lach. We express gratitude, acknowledgement, submission, concession that you exist, that you are the ultimate existence. But then we add on to that you are our God. It's not just that there is a God in this world. There are people who do believe in God, but they don't believe that God is also a personal God. They believe God is a transcendent God, that God is a creator. And whether they believe God is involved in creation or not, they don't look at God in terms of a personal God who cares and has a relationship with us. So we're grateful to you, not just that you are God, but that you are our God. Then there's additional gratitude, that he's also the God of our fathers. Now, how does that add to gratitude? The fact that he's our God, isn't that enough? But no. The fact that he's the God of our fathers enhances our relationship with God. Because a person who has a tradition that goes from one generation to another has, in certain ways, a deeper connection than if you just develop a new relationship with something. It's something that was ingrained in us, something that we inherited from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God is the God of our fathers, and therefore it's inborn in us. Now there's an advantage to not be descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. physically, genealogically speaking, that we have a relationship with God that we created on our own. And that's the advantage of someone who was converted into Judaism, as Maimonides writes to a convert, that your connection to God is direct, not through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Nevertheless, even the convert is spiritually connected to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It just, we try to focus when we're dealing with each person on their special quality that they have to be grateful for. So someone who was born into the Jewish community feels this inheritance very, very vividly, very forcefully, that they inherited this godly trait, the recognition of God that was passed down to us through our fathers. And then we say that you are our God forever. You will never abandon us, even though God had many reasons that he should have abandoned us as a people because of the things that we did wrong, and we angered him, as the Torah relates and repeats over and over again. Yet, the Torah itself says, Lo mi'astim v'lo ga'altim v'chalos. I never really despise them and allow them to ever be destroyed. Ani Hashem lo shinisi v'atem b'nei Yaakov lo chilisem. I, God, never changed, the prophet said, and you, the children of Jacob, will never be destroyed. Just as God is immortal and eternal, so are we. And that is something to be grateful for, that God will always be our God. It'll never stop. And in Kabbalah, we're told that this prayer deals with different aspects of God. When we say you, we acknowledge you, that's God's essence. When we say you are the God, in Hebrew, the word is hu. Sha'atahu, who is third person. It's the hidden aspect of God. Besides God's essence, there's also the transcendent aspect of God. God's essence is more than transcendent. It's beyond even being called transcendent. It's the essence. But then there's the part of God that is who means he. He is she, but we're not going to go into that. Who in Hebrew means the third person, he. It's a pronoun that refers to someone that you're not talking to directly. It's the hidden aspect of God. So we're expressing gratitude to God's essence, and then we're expressing gratitude for the way God deals with us in a transcendent way. And then we say, that's in Kabbalah terminology, that's the level called Atik, which we won't go into right now. And then we say that he's also the God of our fathers. The word God over here is the name of God that is the name that represents God in a concealed state. That from God's hidden state, which is very powerful, that's why it's hidden, God has to then channel that energy through the process known as Tzimtzum into our fathers. Our fathers is a reference to the two highest attributes called Chachma and Bina, wisdom and understanding, conceptual wisdom and understanding, where the wisdom with a seed is developed and embellished and elucidated. So here we go through the entire system of how God relates to us from his essence, through his hiddenness, through his revealed faculties. And later on we'll see how all 10 attributes that God possesses are represented here. And then we say, you are the strength of our lives, the shield of our deliverance in every generation. The Hebrew word over here for strength is tzur. Tzur is actually a stone, a rock. A rock symbolizes strength. But also the word tzur, the Talmud says, has another meaning. It means same as the word tzayar, an artist, someone who draws a painting, someone who gives form to something that has no form. Ein tzur kelokenu, there's a verse, there is no rock like our God. The Talmud says there is no artist like our God. God draws a picture and gives it life. We can draw a picture, but it doesn't have any life. And that's what we mean over here. You're not only the rock, the strength of our life, you also give our life the value of art. You give our lives the value of something that has more than just existence, but something that has form and something that has aesthetic beauty and spiritual qualities. In Pirkei Avos, in Ethics of the Fathers, it says, don't take credit for the Torah you study, because for that reason you were formed. doesn't say for that reason you were created, because Torah knowledge is more than just something that is responsible for our creation. Torah knowledge gives us form, and we're grateful to God for giving us more than substance, but also form. Another thing about tzur, the word tzur, which means a rock, specifically relates to a flintstone, a rock that can be used to create a fire. There's no fire in the rock, it's just the potential for the fire. The same way God is beyond all of the creation, but yet he is the source of all creation. Just as the flintstone doesn't have fire, but it's the source of fire, same way God has this potential for all of our existence. The word tzur is used. Moses was placed in the cleft of the rock, the tzur, and that's when God revealed to him the 13 attributes of mercy. So this word tzur also has not just the strength of our life, but it's also the form, the strength, the compassion, the divine compassion that God uses in guiding our lives. Now, it says two things over here. God is our strength. We take the simple meaning of it. And he's also the shield. What's the difference between strength and a shield? Strength is something that God gives us that we don't have to worry about problems because we have strength. Problems don't even exist. But even when a problem does exist, God is the shield, that he protects us from the threats to us, even if we don't have the ability to express that inner strength. Then we say for generation, in every generation, in Hebrew, the word ladar v'dar, from generation to generation. And that, Kabbalists explain, refers to all the 10 attributes, the 10 sephiros, because a generation is also, the word generation, dar, also means a row. There are different rows of divine attributes. And some divine attributes are products of others, like the emotional attributes are products, the generations that come from the intellectual attributes. At any rate, what we're saying over here is that God's kindness to us, his strength, his deliverance, goes not just from his essence through his transcendent, through his wisdom and understanding, but it goes and permeates all of the 10 attributes as it relates to us. Then we say, we thank you and recount your praise for our lives which are placed in your hand. Now, we're saying that we're thanking you. How are we thanking you? Recounting your praise. There are two ways you could thank someone. You could say thank you, but saying thank you can become mechanical and by rote. But then when you start praising the person, telling others about this person, how wonderful they are, that is the ultimate compliment and expression of gratitude. If, let's say, someone does a service for you, so how do you repay them? By telling other people about it, so the person who helped you will now be helped. That's a sign of gratitude. So here we're saying, yes, we're grateful to you, and we will recount your praise. That will show that our gratitude is not just perfunctory. And this answers the question that we had in the last class. How does the prayer for restoration of the service in the temple, how does that account for gratitude? It's supposed to be one of the 3 blessings of gratitude. And the answer is that sometimes gratitude is not just saying thank you. Sometimes gratitude is demonstrating how much you really appreciate the other. And when you ask God to restore the service that you want to serve him, that's the greatest compliment you can give someone when someone says, I want to serve you. So that's a way of showing gratitude for everything that the person has done for you, in this case, what God has done for us. So there, the gratitude is implicit. Here, it's explicit. But even so, it does mention the other form of gratitude by relating God's praise. And here we say, praise for our lives which are placed in your hand. The emphasis is on the word your hand, because there are places where we find in the Torah that God delegates certain powers to the various natural forces to the constellations, to the stars, although they don't have independent force, they're instruments, but God uses them as instruments to guide the world. The Talmud says, Ein Mazel Yisrael. Israel, the Jewish people, have no constellation. They are directly connected to God. God guides them. We are placed in His hands, and for that we are grateful. And then we say, and for our souls entrusted to you. Before we're talking about our lives. Life could be physical life. That could be the animal soul, the vital soul, as it's sometimes called, the natural soul. Here we're referring to our neshama. This word neshama, even though it comes from the word breathing, it refers to the godly soul that God breathed into us. And the reason why breathing is a metaphor for the godly soul is because when a person breathes, which is the metaphor used for God, you breathe from the very inner part of you, from your very gut. As opposed to when you speak, the air comes out. It doesn't really come from your gut. So breathing is a much more intense and inner dimension of your breath. And that's what it means when it says God breathed the soul into our nostrils. That means that from God's inner dimension, that's where our soul comes from, as opposed to the other aspects of creation, which come from God's external power. And therefore, the neshama here, the soul that we're thanking God for, is the soul that God breathed into us from His inner core, our godly soul. And that's what we're grateful for, not just that we are alive. And then we say that the souls that were entrusted to you. What do you mean that are entrusted to God? They're entrusted to us. God gives us the soul, and here we're saying our souls that are entrusted to you. But the answer is, commentaries point out, that when we go to sleep, we entrust our souls back to God. He watches our souls for us, and in the morning, He returns it to us. And this is one of the expressions of faithfulness that we refer to in the Modani prayer. Great is your faithfulness, that God could say, I'm going to withhold the soul because you owe me something. And God says, no, you trusted me with the soul, I will return it to you. Even though you may owe me, I'll take care of the debts another way. I'll give you more time, but I will not withhold the soul back from you. And that we're grateful for, that God, in spite of everything, will give us back our souls and not withhold it. And that is also seen as an allusion to the time of the resurrection of the dead, when God will return the souls to the bodies. That even though the souls temporarily, after a person dies, is entrusted to God, God is, so to speak, in control and watching over those souls, but nevertheless, those souls are still held in reserve for us and will eventually come back to us. This is only one half of the prayer, and we will continue, God willing, next week with the other half. This is the longest of the blessings, of the 19 blessings in the Amidah. It's at least double the size of the second longest, and we'll have to talk about it next week. In addition, there's another modim that is said in a communal service. When the person who repeats the Amidah gets to this modim, everyone says modim, but a little different version of it, and it's called the rabbinical modim, and we'll talk about it, God willing, next week. Have a good evening, and I'll hope to see everyone again next week, God willing.